Is that okay? Can you hear me? Hi, everyone. Welcome to the National Football Museum. Quick show of hands. Manchester United fans in the audience today? Very nice. Manchester United fans going to the match today? Lucky, lucky people. Non-Manchester United fans in the audience? Boo. Eric Cantona fans in the audience? Very nice, very nice. Well, welcome. Thanks for joining us. Hopefully it's just going to be a nice discussion about Man United, Eric Cantona, all things excitable about the game tonight. Let me just introduce you to the panel. We have, at the end here, Nooruddean Choudry, new author.
Yeah.
How are you feeling about that?
About being an author?
Yeah.
It's real.
Before this
is mad.
Nooruddean was known for being a Twitter-bearded genius, is this correct?
Yeah, and you can see there's no beard and no genius. Yeah.
We first met on Twitter.
Yeah.
We first met in real life today. We did find out through me reading Nooruddean's book that his best friend from primary school, I went to high school with, and there is also a photo of him at the back there, so it's a very, very small world. Yeah. Also here we have Wayne Barton.
Hello.
Who wrote a book, King Eric,
yep.
And also currently has a book out about Duncan Edwards, who is another eternal Manchester United hero. And we have Marek, who is responsible for the exhibition upstairs.
I'd say it helps with it.
You helped with it. So we'll get back to that in a bit. How did that exhibition first come about, by the way? How did you get Eric Cantona to... He was down here at the museum, wasn't he, just the other day?
He was, yeah. So we were approached by Michael Brown, who's the artist, who essentially created the 10 works that are up there. It was a few years ago, actually, so it was before my time, so I've only been at the Football Museum for 10 months now. I worked for Leeds Museums before that. So he approached us a few years ago, obviously COVID, lockdown, etc. And then last year, the green light got lit, went ahead with it. And actually, David, who's just sat over there, was the main producer on the exhibition. So me and David basically worked with Michael Brown, the artist, and also with Eric to basically put that show on. Which was amazing, you know, really. I was just saying, the irony is that, so I'm a United fan, but most of my work I do with City, so we do quite a lot of work with City. So it was a real pleasure to be able to work on something like that.
Have people been upstairs to see the exhibition yet? Yeah? Like it? Good.
And yeah, I mean, it's just so unique, you know, somebody like Eric basically funding all that work through Michael, you know, yeah, amazing really.
So before we get back onto Eric, how are we all currently feeling about the current Manchester United team in the Ten Hag era? Nooruddean?
It's great, isn't it? It's,
do you think? Are we excited?
It's funny, isn't it? Because like obviously it's the second leg today. But the first leg against Barcelona, I had that same feeling like in the 90s where it's kind of like, we're not good enough to play these lot. And like, especially at the beginning where they're passing it around. But then you get that same buzz when we get into the game, start feeling confident. And the thing with Ten Hag is like, you properly feel as if it's a team that knows what it's doing now with like proper tactics and everything.
Proper tactics and everything. Wayne?
No, like Noz says, it's a team with an identity. The manager's definitely got control of the club. And I was actually more optimistic last week against Barcelona. And, well, I was keen to see how we would start the game, and we're really proactive. And it's made me feel really optimistic about tonight. I think we're going to get a really good game. But more than that, we're going to see United attack, which is, perhaps we had that feeling of inferiority before, like Noz says. But now, you know, we've got every confidence that we can get a result tonight.
Are we going to win, Marek?
Yeah, the games I've been to this year, the atmosphere is completely different, I think, to last year at Old Trafford. I'd say, like, for want of a better expression, there's like steel. I feel like we've got steel as a club again. And Ten Hag, I think, is from the very top to the very bottom work he does there. I think he's he's boxing everything off, you know. And to me, it's like there's no loose ends week by week. He's, you know, and even though I love him, I think like the Ronaldo situation and stuff, he handled that so well, and I think that's the cut of the guy, I think. So yeah, I'm hopeful. I'm hopeful.
I think we were just saying before, one of the things that Ten Hag seems to have brought to United is a winning mentality, which is something that for those of us that remember from the 90s, there was the certain Frenchman, and part of the impact of him when he appeared in the 90s was that what he brought was a flair and a winning mentality. And so apologies to anyone who's not from the 90s, but we all pretty much grew up around the 90s. So the discussion is going to be thrown back to then, and hopefully it'll trigger some memories for you. Noz, in your book, you talk about your faith. A lot of people, a lot of us growing up, it was our families that brought us to United, fathers, grandfathers, mothers, grandmothers. Your parents were immigrants to this country, so you didn't have that background and history. So you actually had a choice of which team to support. So tell us about your early experiences.
I did. It was weird because, I think when you grow up in somewhere like Manchester, there's certain cultural things that just naturally sort of you take on. One thing's music, another thing's like the sort of working class sort of like, almost like, I know it's a stereotype, but almost like that swagger of like, we can do anything type thing. But also, it's the football. And at primary school, I had two mates. I had more than two mates. But I had a mate who was a United fan and a mate who was a City fan. And it's funny, we were talking before about how the City fan was a better mate for me, and he's actually in a photo back there, which is mad. But he was a City fan, the other one was a United fan, and to be honest, it was Thomas, who was a United fan, was just mad about, because like Terence loved City, but Thomas was mad about United, and I think it was his passion that got me properly into it, and and it's from there. And also, like, as I got a bit older, my elder sister Uzma, she was a proper United fan,
is Uzma
and
here?
still is. Uzma's there.
Hi, Uzma.
And it was also like her influence, and it's that thing of like, it doesn't need to be a mum or dad. It can be anyone that just like you look up to or whatever, and just it's nice just to enjoy that journey with someone.
Wayne, what was your early experiences?
Yeah, well, football skipped a generation in my family. So,
Football skipped a generation?
Well, yeah, my dad wasn't that interested in it. So by the time it came to me, my earlier memories are kind of watching the 85 Cup final, really consciously watching the 90 semi-final and final. And then when I was old enough to travel from Sheffield to Manchester by myself, so 16, 17, that's when I got to go to my first games. So my first heroes were Cantona, were Giggs. I mean, the first heroes were kind of like Robson and Whiteside, but when Giggs and Cantona came into the side, United started to win things, and it really gave United their identity from for what I knew growing up. And that was sort of my experience, really, travelling on buses and coaches over the Pennines and Dales and stuff like that. It's never a good trip, not even now, to be fair. Although I live in Manchester now, so it's not a problem.
Marek, are you Manchester born and bred? United born and bred?
Well, I am born in Stockport, actually, but
controversial. Should be a City fan.
my parents are both. So all my grandparents are Polish, and then my mum and dad are Manchester. But yeah, my granddad worked at Carborundum in sort of like Salford, Stretford, a factory there with my other granddad. So then he used to go to Old Trafford after work, on a Saturday. My dad went a bit, maybe not as much actually as my granddad, and then I kind of followed suit really. But I think, you know what, my first actual memory of being a United fan, of the game I remember is us getting smashed by City 5-1.
Oh.
But my favourite player pre-Eric was Hughes. And I always say, like, that bicycle kick the next day at school, everybody was trying it. It never happened for me, just fell flat on my back. But yeah, I think that's kind of the first thing I kind of remember. which is us getting trounced and saying, well, you scored a great goal, you know. But it's big football family really.
Yeah.
So.
To give a bit of context, my sort of claim to fame and relevance in all this, I had a bit of a claim to fame in 92, 93. I'd been going to watch the football with my dad, who was at the 1968 European Cup final. He'd been devastated by the Busby Babes in 58, had gone to 68, it was the night of nights. And me and my dad managed to get a ticket for the Blackburn game in 1993 when United got crowned as Premier League champions for the first time. I'd been applying all year with just members, didn't have a season ticket. And my dad come running into school to tell me that we got tickets. And on that night, when they got the trophy presentation, I actually featured on the Match of the Day credits. And there's a sequence in the Match of the Day credits that cuts from Peter Schmeichel, who was my hero, singing Glory, Glory, Man United. Then it cut to me on my dad's shoulders in the Stretford end, singing Glory, Glory, Man United. And then cut back to Eric Cantona. And in school the next day, it was absolute carnage. I felt like a hero. Cut forward, now I work on Match of the Day. And so my name appears on the credits as a producer of Match of the Day. So that's my little arc, and that's how I find myself here today. So I digress, but there you go. So Wayne, you've written a book on Eric Cantona.
Yeah.
We've got an art exhibition curated by Eric Cantona here in Manchester. Before Eric signed for United, before he turned up, was there anything in that, this enigma, this guy who was, that would have thought that would be here now with Eric Cantona, gallery curator?
Yeah, well, Cantona, before he came to Manchester, was I don't want to say journeyman footballer in France, because he was a player who had a lot of potential.
Enfant terrible, wasn't he?
Exactly, yeah. He'd lost his way, for sure. I mean, he had problem with the bureaucracy in France. He'd confronted the football authorities. He'd confronted referees with his boots, confronted opponents with his boots. And he was basically persona non grata in France. The blessing that he had was that two people in France, Michel Platini and Gerard Houllier, really, really liked him, and they were obviously two massively influential figures. They had connections in English football, and that's how he ended up in England. He was a precocious player, highly gifted. He played in the same tournament, youth tournament for France that England had Gascoigne in. So there was he was of that kind of stature, really. United were waiting for a player of that talent to step into a spotlight. I mean, if you speak to any of the players from the pre-Cantona days, they will say that they were the best team in the league anyway, because they'd won the European Cup Winners' Cup. They'd come so close to winning the league. But what they needed was the confidence and arrogance that Eric brought with him, and he brought it in spades.
Noz, what do you remember about Eric Cantona first turning up at United?
Well, it was exciting at the time because although we didn't know everything that Cantona would become, to me it just seemed like we were signing a player because I think it was the Charity Shield that season where he did score a hat-trick and he had like an amazing game, and all I really knew about him was that he was a flair player who tried things, little flicks and stuff, and it was also that he was a bit of an enigma off the pitch as well. Stuff like those were the days where like Graham Lasso would read the Guardian and like other players would be like, oh, witchcraft, do you know what I mean, what's this? Sort of reading a newspaper, and it's a big one too. But like with Eric, like he was a painter, he was into poetry. I love the is it the thing? What was the reason he didn't have a second trial with Sheffield Wednesday or something? Where it was, he had an indoor game, didn't he?
Yeah, I don't play on concrete or something. I only play on grass. And Trevor Francis wouldn't give him a second trial on. Well, he wouldn't sign him without seeing him on grass. And so Cantona just hauled himself up in a Holiday Inn and said, "I'm not signing for Sheffield Wednesday." Howard Wilkinson got wind of it, and thankfully they didn't get on either. So he ended up at Manchester.
I mean, Eric's such an icon for United and in the Premier League, synonymous with United, but it's hard, you kind of forget that he won the league with Leeds in that first year, though, wasn't he? And for him to be sold to United was quite controversial. I mean, Leeds did become our feeder club for a little bit after that, but at that time, for Leeds to sell this flair player was quite controversial, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was definitely a controversial sale, but again, revisionism, if you go and talk to anyone from Leeds, at the time, they felt it was a wise move. They were getting rid of what they felt was a bad apple. He was a very talented player. There was a little bit of a resentment, obviously, like Nod says. He'd gone to Leeds, he'd won the league. That's the way that the country saw it. So the players who were at Leeds already for the first 6 months of that season were a little bit resentful. You know, why is he getting all the attention? He'd only played a number of substitute appearances, scored a couple of great goals. So there was a little bit of resentment there. Cantona knew he was a great player. But then there was a fallout with Wilkinson. Like I said, Wilkinson tried to play the hard line with him. He was known as Sergeant Wilco. Cantona would turn up in his own gear when they wanted the players to wear club gear. And yeah, by the time that he was actually sold to United, they felt that they were selling United a Trojan horse, but as it turned out, it was quite the opposite.
And let's not forget, we only actually got him at United because poor Dion Dublin broke his leg.
Yes.
Dion Dublin was our answer.
That's the thing. Well, I mean, before Dion Dublin, weren't we sort of desperately after David Hurst from Sheffield Wednesday? So yeah, it could have been so different, but yeah, like, and again, like, I suppose the biggest thing with Cantona, as well as all the fact he's an enigma and his personality and everything, and the fact that the fans loved him, is that he gave the team belief, didn't he? Yeah. Suddenly, like, you had this player who had so much confidence, like, it spread across the sort of, like, dressing room, and everyone started to feel like we can do this.
One of the things I love about Eric Cantona was, obviously, it was the Premier League era signalled a big change. You know, football as we know it now, with the football megastars, millionaires, it wasn't really like that pre-Premier League. It was much more, you know, still a working man's game. And obviously the Premier League changed that with the money that came into the game, but it didn't happen straight away. But it was like a cultural, Eric arriving, bringing that flair and stardust that he did, seemed that it sort of fit with the start of that Premier League era. Did he change perceptions of football, do you think, Wayne?
Yeah, I think massively he did. I think he was probably the single biggest transformative player in English football history, certainly around the turn of the century. Because you've got to remember at that time, Sky had just taken over, you know, they were installing the Premier League, they had all the rights for that. Channel 4 had the Italian League, and we were all watching that on Sunday mornings thinking this is quite exotic, all a bit wary of a foreigner in the attack of the most high-profile team. And he was very different. You know, he did things his own way. Like Nos said, he studied poetry, he liked art, he talked funny, he said different stuff. The way that he, everyone remembers one Aqua-related, let me just pick that up, Aqua-related quote when he left United. You know, when he left Leeds, he'd said, the salmon that swims idly downstream or something like that. That's what he put on a transfer request to Leeds, to actually get out of Leeds. So he was very, very different. And I think United liked that. United fans definitely liked that. They embraced it. There was one famous news clip of a fan saying, "Who are Cantona? They'll never sing that at Old Trafford." But they obviously did, like, immediately. And the thing was, at the same time, Manchester was undergoing its own cultural revolution. They had the Stone Roses, Oasis, a lot of swagger was coming into the city, a lot of feeling like, you know, we can feel like we're top dogs again. And Cantona, as this sort of visual representation of that he was a little bit different. You know, the old quote, "This is Manchester, we do things differently here." And Cantona was just that. He was just a player playing his own game. Anyone who watched him play, you would see this player of about 6 foot tall, walking around like he was 1 foot taller than everyone else on the Old Trafford pitch. And that was like I said earlier, they felt that they were already the best team in the league. So to have a player like Eric Cantona just in the middle, like he was the boss of it, and he was the boss of it, by the way, it was really something to marvel at.
Marek, what were your memories of Cantona and being a kid in Manchester in that era? Did Cantona help you swagger?
Well, I used to play centre-back at school, I didn't want the limelight, so, he was, to me, to be honest, kind of, I guess, I think there was a lot of rock and roll about him, you know, and maybe kind of the last of that kind of like rock and roller footballers, I think, in a way. Like Wayne was just saying, in terms of that change, and football did change sort of come the turn of the century. You know, obviously it's just that increase in money, the amount of, which isn't a bad thing, but like media training and stuff that, you know, players have, the amount of media around football is obviously just, it gets more and more each year. And yeah, I just think there was something like, it's like an enigma, isn't it? But I just think when you watched Eric play, there was that beautiful balance between, he's a big guy and he's a strong guy, and yet he was so light on his feet, I think, you know. So we were just saying before, we were discussing about like the flicks and the volleys and stuff like that. But for a big guy to do that as well, you know, he's like 6'2" or something like that. Obviously, he had all those skills in his locker, but he was like no fool as well, which is why I think he had that rock and roll element to him. That he was imposing, you know, somebody going up to front him. He's a big guy, you know, and he had that attitude as well.
One of my favourite things about Eric Cantona from that era, you know, football was changing. Most of the squad, not all, but the squad, the bigger members of the United squad lived South Manchester, Bramwell, Prestbury, around there in mock Tudor mansions, you know, but still amongst us. They weren't in Alderley Edge in massive mansions. When Eric came over from Leeds, I remember as being a kid who lived not far from the Cliff training ground. He had a Renault Clio, an old banger of Renault Clio, and he stayed at the Novotel in Worsley when he first came over, which is now the Marriott, if any of you are staying there. And he stayed at the Novotel, and then when he eventually settled in a semi-detached house in Boothstown, on the edge of Worsley.
Yeah.
Just because. And, you know, his kids used to play out football on the streets with other kids, and Eric every now and then would pop out, and he wasn't interested in that other side of the fame of it. Does that match with what you know about him, Wayne?
Yeah, I mean, I think the fame aspect of what football represented was something that he became increasingly disillusioned with as his relationship with Manchester United grew. The art of playing football was the thing that really captivated him. The art of playing for the biggest club in the world. I hate to mention Leeds. I don't think there's any Leeds fans here.
Any Leeds fans here? Oh.
But
what are you doing here?
Well, actually then, you'll like this story. When he won the title with Leeds, he said to the fans in the open top bus tour, he said, "I don't know why I love you, but I do." And the fans sort of really took to him. And I think the point I'm making is that he had that connection with the support wherever he went. You know, obviously Leeds fans didn't like him, they didn't love him after that, but United fans certainly did. And his relationship with the game as an art form was something that was never diluted. I think it became stressed as time went on, and you could see that as time went on. You know, I think a lot of the on-pitch misdemeanors that you saw from him were a consequence of the kind of hostility in the press and the hostility of the game around him. You know, the way that more money was coming into the game. It was kind of like a resistance against that, and that was him lashing out against sort of the establishment, I guess.
It's weird looking back on that era, because actually culturally back then, foreigners in English football was quite a new thing. And we were talking, Man United played Barcelona in 1994 in a famous European Cup tie where Cantona was suspended, but Sir Alex decided to drop Peter Schmeichel, who was a big impact on the team at that time, and we got absolutely battered 4-0 at the Nou Camp, which from a team that was up quite high and full of talent, it was quite the schooling. But it was, at that time, there was a foreigner rule in the European Cup, and that included the Irish, the Welsh, the Scots, so your Brian McClares, your Roy Keanes, your Dennis Irwins. And it's now we have so many players from all over the world, but that's not what it was like at the time. You know, when Arsene Wenger turned up in the Premier League, you know, there's a quote from Sir Alex Ferguson on Match of the Day, where he said, you know, what does he know about English football? He's just come from Japan, he knows nothing. Yeah. No, does that tie in for you as a kid growing up in Manchester, cultural identity? Yeah, there weren't Muslim footballers, you know, as many Muslim footballers. Were there any Muslim footballers back then?
I mean, there might have been, but I wasn't aware of them. I think even now, in terms of Muslim footballers, it tends to be, certainly in the Premier League, it tends to be players that have come over from places like France, where because of all sorts of colonial reasons, a lot of African players, people of African origin, have come over to France and emigrated from there, and they're Muslim. But no, I mean it's not something that sort of. It's not something that sort of I sort of knew growing up, and I wasn't aware of any Muslims. But like, again, like going back to Cantona, I think one of the reasons why he's so loved by everyone, and the funny thing is, like I totally appreciate Leeds fans not being too keen on him, but I know City fans, I know Liverpool fans who hate anything to do with United except Cantona, and it's that thing, like he stands for all the right things. And one thing that really moved me is after the terrorist attack in France, he came out and said, "Don't blame Muslims as a whole," as in sort of don't even use the term moderate Muslim, because what does moderate Muslim mean? Does that mean you are half a Muslim? Or like a lesser Muslim? Like people are committed, proud Muslims who live an Islamic life. That doesn't make them what these people are, these terrorists. And for someone like him, who is an ex-player who doesn't need that heat, doesn't need that sort of like controversy, to say something like that, it meant so much. And again, that throughout his life, I think the thing that most people loved about him, as well as the football, is he didn't care. He didn't care what people thought. All he cared about is what he believed to be true and right.
And so on that then, as a young lad growing up in Manchester, looking for idols, looking to to find your place, what was that intersection? It's what you've written about in your book, of the intersection of your football, your faith, how that sits, how that crosses.
Yeah, and to me, it's not separate things. It's not like football's here and faith is here. It's always been sort of intertwined, and like even like praying, like you kind of think, oh, when you sort of like do your prayers 5 times a day, like it's got to be something grand, like you pray for world peace or sort of that you will do something in your future. Like I prayed for that stuff as well, but I also prayed that United would sign Baggio or sort of like, I don't know, like Ian Rush would get a slight niggle before the game and would be out. Like genuinely, like that's how I grew up, and that's how central sort of my religion was to me, but also how it had absolutely everything to do with the most sort of all-consuming passion in my life growing up, which was football. So it wasn't separate things. It was always combined. And
did you feel as a young lad from Pakistani background growing up in Manchester that there was a place for you in football? Did that feel like an inclusive thing for you?
Yeah, and I think anyone, doesn't matter if you're from like an immigrant community or whatever, like everyone, especially at that teenage sort of phase, you want to belong to something, and you're desperate to find your way, and you're desperate to find something that you belong to in your gang or whatever. And there's certain things in life that really help sort of lubricate that sort of social sort of dynamic. It's I mean, you can get it with music. Like you can become a goth and you get all goth mates or whatever, or you can do it through something like football. And I think the beautiful thing about football, like now, when a lot of us go to Old Trafford, there's going to be people from all around the world, and the only thing they've got in common is that they support this team, and there's something dead beautiful about that. But also, it's always been there. It's again and again, like people take the mickey out of like Cockney Reds. Why? What's wrong with Cockney Reds? Like they've been supporting United for as long as we have. You can't chastise or shut up people who are like from India or Indonesia or Malaysia supporting United, because they show just as much commitment in a different way. They get up at 2:30 to watch games. It's that thing of like it's an all-encompassing thing, and that's what makes it so special. And again, for me growing up, that's what made it so special in my life, because not only was it a case of me watching sport on telly, it was like this whole world that I could dive into.
I think it definitely felt like, I don't know, anyone else grow up in Manchester in the 90s here? A few? Yeah. I think it definitely did feel, it added to that swagger. I felt as a kid growing up in Manchester in a way that you can't separate yourself from. But there was something about, I've got friends who didn't grow up in Manchester, but if you ever were lucky enough to travel or meet from somewhere abroad and you asked where you're from, you could say you were from Manchester, and people knew that, largely because of the football, the music, the culture of Manchester at the time. Was that your experiences too, Marek? What music were you into?
I was a mad Stone Roses fan as a kid, especially when you find out, Ian Brown was everything to me at one point, and they basically split up just as I got into them. So, yeah.
So you're getting heckled from the crowd here. That's how controversial that is.
But the thing is that I think thinking about I know they reformed and stuff like that, but like Eric, the enigma lives on, I think, of Eric and his career at United, because it wasn't as long as you think. What I really like is that he only didn't win the Prem 1 year that he spent in it. So, he was a winner from start to end. But I forgot, I think it was Fergie mentioned this a while back, but he was he was there with us for 5 years or whatever. And it was like an intense relationship, and then it was just gone.
Yeah.
And there's something, that's like a really successful band, whether Sex Pistols, Stone Roses, they're there and then they're gone. And there's something quite powerful about that, I think. Just as much as it can be as powerful as a player that has an amazing career for 20 years, but for us, I think, or as United fans anyway, with Eric, it was like an absolute massive punch, and it was, it's just, and then it lives on like that, it doesn't fade.
Wayne, do you think, obviously there was talk about that 1 year that United didn't win the Premiership when Eric was suspended. Do you think there's a little bit that mythology of Cantona, that instant at Crystal Palace, everything that happened afterwards, is that almost overshadowed what he was like as a footballer and his football identity? What's the most iconic Cantona moment for you? And can you separate him from his controversies?
I know what you mean. People do think Eric Cantona, Crystal Palace, because that's the most iconic moment. Eric Cantona, Kung Fu Kick. I bet if you typed his name into Google, those are the two things that first come up. But it's probably not one of the last things, but it's down the list of things that I think about when I think about him. There's probably another Sellers Park moment that I put above that when he scored a volley against Wimbledon, flicked it up and volleyed it, which was my favourite goal for years. Again, trying to recreate that one and failing many times. So there was that moment, which was more iconic. There was obviously the Sunderland goal, which he scored towards the end of his career. I think for me, the thing with Eric Cantona was that we'd never got the first 5 or 6 years of him at United. He's already spent sort of 10 years of his career in France. And if he'd spent another 5 years of his career at Old Trafford, then fine, that would have been great. But what we got was that intense burst. We got that 5 years, and we didn't get to see a downfall. Even that last year, he might have felt that he was below his standards. A lot of people do think he was below his standards. A lot of us who hero worshipped of him, we won't hear of that. We'll just say he played brilliantly and scored some great goals, one of his best in that period of time. So I think in terms of the relationship between United and Cantona, it's probably best that it lasted the period in which it did. And I really don't consider the Palace thing a lot of people will. I know that they will because it's so iconic.
Well, maybe the speech afterwards.
Yeah, the
seagulls following the trawler as well.
Exactly, but there was a whole episode. You've got to remember, Cantona at that time, we were talking about Italian football and everything like that, and Sky football, Sky bringing into the Premier League and everything. There was also a vacation of the top player in the country since Paul Gascoigne had left. They needed this kind of player to step into the spotlight.
you know, Gazza's tears and everything, there hadn't been a player who'd sort of walked into that to be the national darling. And Cantona wasn't the national darling, but he was definitely the player who came into that spotlight. And because he was so mysterious, it was kind of like, what's he going to do next? And we loved it as United fans, because what he was going to do next usually was something brilliant. But when the moment came when it wasn't brilliant, when it was a controversy, he took football from the back pages to the front pages and instantly changed the game of football, because everyone then became interested in footballers' private lives. You know, there were cameras hounding him on the beach and everything like that. And then, obviously, the player who came after Cantona into that spotlight was David Beckham. And we all know what happened then. Cantona was revolutionary on and off the pitch. So, while I don't think of Palace as the defining moment, it probably was for the British game in the way that it turned footballers into celebrities in a funny way.
I think as a United fan from that era, actually one of the true lasting legacies of Cantona as well from that short period, which is reflected in the gallery upstairs and in Michael Brown's painting, was his impact on the class of 92.
Yeah.
Noz, I think you wrote about that in your book as well, that it was that Cantona during that time and the impact that you had on Beckham, but Scholes, the Nevilles coming through, and that winning mentality that Cantona brought on the field from 92 onwards lasted much longer into United's future.
Yeah. No, I agree with that. I think it was a massively, for that reason, I would call him the most influential player in United's history. If you look at Beckham, Butt, Scholes, Giggs, you've got something of Cantona in each of those players. And yeah, not least the determination that influenced that generation of success.
And ironically, it was actually discipline as well that Ferguson would say that he gave to those players. We talk about, people think of Cantona for his ill discipline publicly, but actually his training discipline, that was some of what was instilled, that mythology on the training ground at the cliff in Broughton. Cantona would stay back, practice, 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 and on the sidelines was that class of 92. Yeah. You liked David Beckham, who went on to score all those iconic free kicks. It's because they wanted to. I mean, Beckham had been doing that with practicing with his dad for a long time, but instilled that work ethic in that group.
Absolutely, yeah.
Noz, what do you remember? Do you think of Cantona's impact on that, with that group?
No, completely, and it's that thing of like he instilled that sort of sense of belief in the team, and I think in fairness to Ferguson, like I think one of Ferguson's like greatest assets or attributes was that he was always a pragmatist. So it wasn't like one rule fits all. Like he'd deal with different players in different ways. Sometimes he'd be quite harsh on him. Like he was really harsh on Beckham, I think, throughout his career, because he felt he needed that. But with Cantona, he did get preferential treatment, but it's because Fergie realised that that's what Cantona needed. And you talk about all these sort of flowery terms like finding your spiritual home. It's really just finding somewhere that fits you. It's like anyone in their jobs. Sometimes you can be really good at something, but the environment you're in just isn't quite right for you. But then, as soon as you move to a job where you like the people and it fits in, that all works out. And obviously at United it all just clicked. So yeah, and anyone, like you'll get rival fans that'll say, yeah, but Cantona only scored this amount of goals, or he only won this. And if you compare him to this other player and his XG or whatever, it's like, get a life. Like, don't stop being a nerd. Like just think of the environmental and cultural sort of like difference he made to United, and it's that thing you can't calculate in statistics. It's all those intangibles that make football amazing, and you can't just turn football into maths.
You can't just turn football into maths. Marek, in terms of the exhibition, you could maybe just talking about Cantona and lifting up that Messiah of the class of 92, that iconic painting in there. I don't know if everyone's seen it with Cantona at the heart of that. Do you want to just explain a little bit about that, how it sits in the museum and its relevance, and with Michael?
Yeah, I mean, I do. It's probably so. It's on long-term loan. So once this exhibition finishes, it will be going off with the other works. But we have had it for 10 years, which has been an amazing privilege. And I do think it's one of. I mean, like Eric, it's an enigma in itself, I think. You know, it in a way, I think encapsulates quite beautifully a cultural shift in football. Eric as a cultural icon, and then also, I was going to say actually, I think like that. I remember when I was at high school in '95, '96, and remember whether it was Liverpool or City, were always saying during that season, if it wasn't for Eric, we wouldn't have won the double. And they're right, we wouldn't have. But between about 95, 97, Eric was that buffer between the old school Fergie team and then literally giving birth to the class of 92 slowly. I mean, obviously they were all earning their own merits as well, but he was like that one constant and that presence that they needed to do that. So in a way, I kind of think that's his like last gift to us as fans, that he saw that through and was almost like a father figure. And then in that painting, that's kind of, I mean, it encapsulates him coming back after the kick, and that kind of celebration of him. But it is also about that, the class of '92 literally going on to do even better, and achieve even more, in a different way, because they weren't Eric, but also as a collective as well, I think, which is important, because that's the thing that united after Eric. I would say personally, like those kids, what they achieved in whatever it was, 10 years, there was a hell of a lot of unity there.
Yeah. Should we throw it out to the crowd? I don't know if we have got any questions. But have we got any questions here in the crowd for any of the panel? Gentleman down here? If it's directed to anyone in particular, let us know. But tell us your name first.
Sorry, my name's Johnny Graham.
Hi.
Thank you. I'll not sing, don't worry. It's basically about Eric, so I suppose maybe Wayne. Just thinking of the time when Eric came and the enigma that he was and is. Social media wasn't around then. And I was just wondering what your thoughts would be, how Eric would have coped with social media as it is now. I always keep thinking to myself, if he had Twitter, all the wonderful quotes he could have put out on Twitter would have been just so cool to read. So I was just wondering what you think, what impact social media would have had on Eric back in the days when he was playing for United.
Have you seen Eric on Instagram?
Yes.
I think he would have been just the same. My concern is whether Fergie's tolerance of him, which was all-consuming, like Noz says, would have extended to that form of expression. It's interesting because obviously he was the one in that team, in that squad, who would have certainly taken to social media to say something. You can think of what happened in '95. Imagine him being on social media while he was banned. It's interesting. I've never thought about it, to be honest.
Eric on TikTok.
Could he manage it? Or how long do you get on TikTok? Like 6 seconds or something? I don't know. His form of expression is great, and I follow him on Instagram, and he's dead funny on Instagram. Whether or not that would have been a recipe for positive things in his career, I definitely don't think so. And I think I think we know from United not embracing social media until the day that Sir Alex retired that he probably wouldn't have been a fan of it either. It would have been interesting to see, though, Fergie tolerating it with Carrick, Carrick, completely different kettle of fish.
You couldn't imagine Eric doing the post of going, "So sorry, bad result, we go again."
Exactly, yeah.
It probably would have been a little bit more interesting.
Yeah, for sure.
Gentleman at the back there.
Name's Amrik. A question to Nooruddean. Do you feel your prayers have been answered now that we've got Ten Hag?
All our prayers have been answered now we've got Ten Hag. Go on, Naz.
I think in Islam, we're kind of always taught that you get what you should get, not what you always want. And I wanted Pochettino, and yeah, maybe God knows best.
I like it. Gentleman there.
Hey guys, name's JD. You've spoken about a player that was a great player, was a great United player, but also had this characteristic where he really sort of unified the fans. I mean, Naz, I thought you articulated really well. It doesn't matter sort of where you're from. Cantona was somebody that people really adored. If you take a look at our support right now, I think I would characterize it as not very unified at the moment. And I sort of wonder whether in a way the day has gone by where there could be somebody who sort of unifies fans as Cantona did. I wonder what your thoughts are on that, because I think the environment right now is one where it's whether you're speaking about the ownership or how things are evolving on the pitch as well. I think it doesn't strike me that there's this sort of basis to find unity again, even with a great player. And let's imagine Rashford continues his run. I mean, I'm just curious what your thoughts are on that.
Nooruddean, do you want to pick up that? Throw you that curveball.
I think because of social media, we see it far more like these different sort of like types of fans, and I think they probably were always there. What I found is I start to realise that I've got more in common with match-going Liverpool fans or match-going Leeds fans or match-going City fans than I necessarily have with younger fans who like come out with phrases like Pinaldo and Pesa. So I think it's fine. I think it's fine for different people to communicate in different ways. And in terms of because obviously at the moment with the ownership situation, there's all sorts of controversy about that. And I think you've just got to make up your own mind. And I think the problems occur when people get angry at other people for having a different opinion. So come up with your own opinion on anything, whether it's whether Anthony is a good signing or whoever should take over the club. But don't have a go at somebody else just because they've got a difference of opinion. And I mean, that's how I feel about social media just in general.
Yeah, I think there is a difference now with match-going fans and internet fandom. I think it's a whole different thing completely, isn't it? What about you, Wayne? Do you see a difference?
Yeah, there's definitely a difference. There's an amplification, polarization. When you're talking about individual players, you'll get people supporting a player over a team. I do think there is some unification with Marcus Rashford. I think he's already amongst the match-going fans for definite. Anyone who's from Manchester who goes to United, Rashford is he's not Cantona in terms of personality, but he's the unifier in terms of that. Everyone is so proud of him. And when he scores goals, especially after not just the political changes that he's made, but the difficult situation they had over the last year. So he's come back into the side and he's playing well and scoring goals. These have been some of the most emotional goals we've seen at United for years, especially the first few when he was getting back into form. It was like, God, he's back again. Do you know? And it was so good to see him with that weight off his shoulders. And that is a connection. You can't deny that. And that, when you're talking about, I don't want to categorise online fans, but people who get on Marcus's back and say, you've been too political, or you'll never be as good as Ronaldo, you know, because they like Ronaldo and they sort of put Rashford as sort of like the culprit because he's playing and Ronaldo wasn't. But I just think that he is a unifier in that respect. First of all, because he's local, and that's a lot of what United already stand for. But second of all, because of the redemption as well, because we've stuck behind him, we've got behind him, and we haven't just sort of said he's not going to make it, and I'm just going to say that he's rubbish, regardless of the fact that he's playing well. A lot of people, you know, I was one included, thinking it might be time that, you know, he moves on for his own betterment, but he stayed, and there's nobody more delighted than I am when I see him scoring goals for United. So I definitely think he's the unifier in the team.
Any other questions? Lady at the front here.
Hi, as someone who grew up in Manchester but also used to work very close to Marseille, I couldn't help but notice how similar those two cities are culturally, in terms of music, food, football, everything that you kind of mentioned today. Maybe not the weather, but quite similar. Do you think that contributed to Eric finding his spiritual home, as you mentioned, Nooruddean, in Manchester?
Yeah, I mean, I think there are comparisons with Marseille. Like Marseille's got a strong immigrant heritage, and it's a bustling sort of just loads of cultures coming together, and also like Cantona's heritage is it Corsican?
Yeah, both
Spanish, yeah.
both his
But I think growing up around that, that'll inevitably become part of your personality. And it's the same in Manchester. Like the great thing about living in a big city like Manchester is there's so many influences. Like Manchester's known for things like the proud sort of Jewish heritage, like Wimslow Road and like Curry Mile. There's
the Hacienda, Tony Wilson.
Yeah, the Hacienda. Like even like so much of the music is Irish in heritage. So there's so many factors that build up the identity of a place. And yeah, I can totally imagine that where Cantona was from influenced where he eventually belonged.
Any other questions?
I'd like to know from Noz, if that's all right, just a little bit about the process of writing the book. Obviously, it's really deeply personal, and how did you keep records to then involve in the book? And was it a case of going and chatting to old friends and family members to trigger some of those memories? Thanks.
I mean, it was dead hard because like it was my first book, and like being about yourself, that can be quite a mind. Can be quite difficult. I mean, essentially, like I had to get through the process of getting over myself, because you kind of like you think of a book and you kind of think, oh, this is going to last forever, and this is what people are going to think of me. But then you need to forget all about that and just think, well, I need to be as sincere as possible, and not show off, not try and use flowery prose, and just be as honest as possible. And that's what I tried to do. So even things that I don't remember sort of in minuscule detail, I just tried to get my feeling over how I felt at that point. So yeah, and again, like one thing that I spoke to quite a few people about writing the book, and I was worried, like, is this going to have like a really narrow sort of audience because it's about a very particular thing? But anyone I spoke to kind of said, the more specific you make it, in a strange way, the more universal it can be. So yeah.
Any more questions? Anything that anyone on the panel hasn't shared that you would like to share before we wrap it up? No? Let's move on then. The guys will... Do you want to hold your books up? Do you want to do a mini sales pitch?
Yeah.
Wayne, mini sales pitch of your book?
It's about Eric. That should say it all, right? You know.
Available in all good bookshops, including the one at the museum?
Absolutely, yeah. Oh, the best bookshop is the one at the museum. So yeah, of course.
And Nooruddean?
I mean, it's just about me growing up in the late 80s and 90s. Just sort of finding football, falling in love with Man United, and just my experience. So yeah.
So the authors will stick around after the talk if anyone wants to speak to them. The books are available in the bookshop. If you'd like to buy a copy and get it signed, I'm sure they'll be very happy to do that. Also, if you haven't seen the exhibition, if you haven't seen the Cantona portrait, do go up and see it. It's amazing. I did see Michael Brown, the artist, hanging around here earlier. He is and was around, and I saw him painting before. So if you get a chance, do see that. And other than that, up the Ten Hag mighty Reds. Let's go have Barcelona. Thank you very much.